And give me one moment. You should send the small people to the front so they can see properly. And maybe feel free to sit down if you're more comfortable doing that, but make yourselves comfortable. So it's really lovely to be here. I've been to Groningen before, but only on holiday. Now I'm here working, and now I'm here at yet another open source community conference that's been organized by volunteers who worked hard to put it together. And it's their work, it's real work, it's hard work, but it's not their job. So it's this strange mixture of pleasure and passion, which is also a little bit what I want to talk about today. So I want to say thank you to the organizers, first of all, for inviting me. In fact, you invited me more than a year and a half ago, I think, but this was the first time I could come. But especially thank you to all the organizers and volunteers for putting this on, because I really do appreciate it, for putting it on for us. Thank you. So that's me. I'm Daniele Procida. That's what I look like on television. I'm a director of engineering at Canonical, and I lead, amongst other things, documentation practice at Canonical. What else do you need to know about me? I've been involved in Python for 16 years or so. I was a Django project co-developer when that was a thing. I've organized my own Python conferences too. Some of you may remember me from those. I've been involved for more than a decade in the African Python movement too, and perhaps some of you have encountered the diataxis documentation approach that I've also developed over the last few years. And just very briefly, I'll show this again later, so don't be in a hurry. We're hiring, Canonical's hiring many, many people. It might be you, lots of Python people. I'll show it at the end, so I don't want to leave that up there. I want to talk about Python and play and work and some of the problems that I see in there. And these are real problems. It seems to me that each of them reaches into my own work in Python and software somehow. They touch Python, they reach open source software. And when I say problem, I don't necessarily mean a problem as in something that's going wrong. You know, like you can have a mathematics problem or a problem in philosophy, something you want to solve. They feel they're something that I want to untangle. They're complex things and that I want to understand them better. But some of them are things that are going wrong. Problems that need to be put right. Things that I find troubling, not just puzzling. So I started learning Python 16 years ago, as I said, for work. And I couldn't help noticing how often I was told that it would be fun, that learning Python would be fun. And of course, we're quite used to being told that something will be fun. And it's usually when somebody wants to persuade you to do something that they think maybe you don't want to do. And often they'll tell you that it's easy too. In fact, that it's surprisingly fun and easy because they know perfectly well that you doubt both of those things. And you think, why is this person telling me this is going to be fun and easy? And you are right to be suspicious. And I think it's true that Python is easier than assembly language, and I don't remember hearing people making those claims about fun who were talking about C++, for example, so much. I wanted to find out recently whether Python was still supposed to be fun, but I think the web was broken on that day, and I didn't really come up with any answers, but I went on to at least one interesting rabbit hole on that day. Anyway, I did learn Python, and it wasn't fun. In fact, I can't remember at any time thinking while programming, this is fun. I remember mostly this sensation of trying to reach for things that were always just a little bit out of my grasp. And then immense relief when I finally got hold of them. And it only lasted for a very short while because then I'd have to move on to the next thing very shortly afterwards. So it's never permanent. So, of course, there's huge satisfaction in programming, and I've experienced that, especially when I see that my work is solving a problem, but I've never once found programming itself fun, I think. And I never wanted that anyway. I didn't look for it. I didn't want it to be fun. I didn't want to be a great programmer. I just wanted to make it solve some problems. And I'm just suspicious of fun. It could be because I'm a bit miserable. But I immediately feel resistant when somebody tells me that something's going to be fun. And this is the territory that I want to explore, and the constellations of related meaning that we find in it. And when I think about my work in software and Python, certain concepts and words and relationships keep popping up in different guises, doing different things, like the word fun, which I've already interrogated in quite a superficial way, and play, which is a word that seems to do an amazing amount of work. And it's difficult to get this off the ground because these things are tangled up so much for each other. And you pick up one thing, you immediately run into a question like, you start with fun and you get to funny. Now, it might be fun to ride a bicycle with your little niece or nephew, but it wouldn't necessarily be funny unless you fell off or something. And it's also funny that I can do certain things in English with some of these connections, but not in other languages. So the word play, in English, in Dutch, in Latin, I can play an instrument, but not in Italian, which is much closer to Latin. And as well as the relationships of connection, there are some relationships of opposition, like, if play is opposed to work, and work is also opposed to pleasure, and pleasure is opposed to pain, is there are the relationships that all these things stand in? It's not completely clear, and it's quite interesting. So play in Latin is ludus, or the verb ludere, to play, and in Latin the meanings are even wider and more of them than there are in English. But they're all clustered around these ideas of play, sport, games, or even training or school. And meanwhile, Python itself has always been positioned as being playful. Python itself has a ludic, playful quality. It's named for Monty Python, and it doesn't exhibit the same kind of forceful sense of humor. That has remained a reference point. And especially in the early days, as you can see some examples, things in Python software would often have Monty Python-related names. In fact, I think, what's interesting is how we've shifted away from that reference, because I think Pylance is the only one of those that has emerged in the last 10 years or so. The others are much older. And Monty Python is becoming increasingly distant from Python, the programming language, and distant from the people who are likely to encounter and use Python. No longer Westerners and Europeans who would have seen it on television when they were younger, but and found it funny, but people who have the relationship in the opposite way around. They know the Python programming language, and then they learn something about Monty Python afterwards. And what they make of it, I don't know. What does Monty Python mean to a Chinese or an Indonesian teenager in the year 2025 who discovers it through Python? It's also interesting how the connection with Monty Python actually denies Python an iconography related to its inspiration. So you can use Monty Python names for things, but it's not so easy to do that with images, because there isn't a clear, simple image for Monty Python, and there's also copyright images, of course. So we get a lot of snaky imagery, some obvious and some just hinting at it, and we get friendly, encouraging snakes, and we have some angry and aggressive looking ones, and I've even seen some Python-related graphics that featured aggressive snakes with venom dropping from their fangs, which are clearly not Pythons, and clearly not Monty Python. And the thing is that none of these choices are neutral. I know people very well from some of the African communities, like, they have all said at one time or another, we had to spend a lot of time that what we are doing has nothing to do with snakes. In Nigeria, the local community, the Nigerian Python community, trying to register the name for their association with the authorities, had to go back again and again because of this problematic association. In Namibia, they wanted to get kids and schools to participate in Python workshops. Now, this is a country in which pythons are going to eat your livestock, and snakes can and will kill you. So it's not an attractive association. It's if you imagine you were trying to run software classes for kids here, and they were called do-it-yourself tattoo kit or something like that. You know, the parents would be really eager to send their children to that. Or unprotected sex as the name of a programming language. How is that going to go down? Because that's what Python is doing in some places. A Namibian official said to me, as though I were responsible once, said, "Why did you name it Python?" Absolutely baffled that we would have made such a choice. And I sense that at the heart of Python, there's been a bit of a struggle to put some distance between a way to represent the language and imagery that both Monty Python and snakes can offer, which is why we see this increasing abstraction. You know, there's the MicroPython logo, which used to have a snake on it and no longer does. So anyway, I was really made aware of Python's ludic nature even before I started touching Python itself. And 16 years later, I'm not entirely sure where I stand on the subject. A lot of that fun doesn't speak to me personally, as I said, possibly because I'm a bit miserable. But anyway, a lot of fun doesn't travel well. It doesn't travel well across cultures, and it doesn't travel well across generations. And do people really need to have all this fun anyway, all the time? So back to the question, is Python fun? Well, I think play somehow is baked into the name and nature of Python itself. And let's ask a related question. Is Python funny? Is there something funny about Python? As in, does the Python language somehow offer itself up to humor? And I think the answer to that question is actually yes, it does. So, this is my argument. I think that humor, the funny, lies essentially in the surprising violation of an expectation of congruity. You were expecting this that was fitting to the situation, that was appropriate, and you were surprised by that, which wasn't. And it didn't just violate your expectations, it also violated your sense of what was fitting or congruous. So, you know, you're in the kitchen repairing a radio, and you reach out for a screwdriver, and you find a banana in your hand, and that's funny. It's that kind of experience is a momentary reordering of the world, because it is this surprising violation of an expectation of congruence. And that momentary reordering gives us surprise and delight. It gives us a glimpse of something that doesn't exist. It's a brief kind of magic. And not everything that's a surprising violation of expectations is going to be funny. Some of it will be very unfunny indeed. But I do think that everything that is funny represents a surprising violation of expectations of congruity. So other thinkers who are, they're all a lot wiser and more famous and also more dead than I am, have had a lot more to say on the subject of humor and funniness, so I'm not going to say any more. But I do think this idea about humor applies to Python. And Python, so what I'm saying now is Python is full of expectations that can be violated in that way. And they include the formal ones of the language's syntax and its function. But there are also some strongly asserted expectations of idiom. We have this idea that something can be Pythonic, and I was completely baffled, or intrigued, not baffled, really puzzled and interested in this idea when I first started learning Python. I cared about, would my code actually run at all? Would it then, if it ran, do what I wanted to do, and would it do it well enough, you know, fast enough and accurately enough? It didn't once occur to me that somebody might be thinking of judging my code on some basis other than the functional. It felt like I was going for a job or for a university course in some place on the other side of the world and feeling the pressure to succeed and being put down in the middle of the city and being told, make sure you look and act and talk like a local. And that's what Pythonic, overladen with expectations, felt like. I don't know if anybody else had that kind of experience when encountering it for the first time. So the Zen of Python is another example of Python's ludic quality. I don't actually much like the Zen of Python because I'm miserable, but I do like this part of it. This idea that there should be one, and preferably only one way, one obvious way to do it. I think that's really profound. And when I saw it, I thought, wow, I don't understand this and I want to. And this is about a deep and meaningful kind of expectation. And it's what makes Python not just a big target, but a rich and deep target for violated expectations of congruity. It allows for a quality of something deeply funny in that violation. So, humor is about the violation of an expectation. You can only have an expectation if there is a rule, however implicit that rule might be. So you've heard the expression that the exception that proves the rule. It means that if there's an exception, there must be a rule, because you can't have an exception unless it is an exception to a rule. The rule is primary. It's what allows the exception to exist. You could have a rule without any exceptions, but it makes no sense to talk about an exception that's not an exception to a rule. Similarly, the truth is primary, and it allows falsehood to exist. Correctness is primary, it allows error to exist. Seriousness is primary, and that allows fun to exist. So fun is a kind of holiday from seriousness. And it's never the other way around. It's always the exception that is the holiday from the rule. Even an actual holiday is a holiday from the rule, from the expectations of ordinary life. And there you can see it's not just a matter of logic, that exceptions depend on rules, but the experience of a holiday depends on your experience of work. No, not up here in the north, but down in the south, of course, they have carnivals, where that's an important holiday from the rule, in which normal expectations are violated. It's only possible to have the carnival because there are normal expectations all of the rest of the year. Or you probably remember what it was like to be in school at the end of term when all those rules were relaxed and you were allowed to do the things that would have been completely forbidden in the rest of the school year. This short magic time when the rules were allowed to be violated. But all that specialness and magic depends on the fact that there is a normal. So the paradox of the holiday is that you must have the work in order to have the holiday. It was God's idea. God invented the day off. He rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And the paradox of God's rest is that he had to do all the work first so that he could have the rest. And that's why I think this expectation of fun in Python that I mentioned right at the beginning is a bit of a problem, because if fun has to be a holiday from seriousness, if fun is the violation of the expectation, the stepping out of the ordinary, and it depends on the expectation in order to exist as fun, as that holiday, how can fun be made the expectation? I think expectations actually should be exceptional. And it's not just a formal or logical requirement. I think it's about the quality of the experience. And sometimes this world of Python, not just Python, but all of software, in fact, the whole bloody world, seems to be shot through with this low-level expectation of constant fun at a low level, a constant amusement. But if I'm always amused, if there's always a little bit of fun and funniness in everything and everywhere, when will I ever experience that real magic of the violation when something erupts and there's this momentary transformation of the world? You can't replace a grand moment of rupture with a kind of low-level constant buzzing. You can't have a holiday unless you can't experience a holiday unless you have to work. And I want to get into the deeper question of play, related to, but a little bit different from the question of fun. This gentleman is one of yours from Groningen. It's Johan Huizinga. He was born here in 1872. Is he very well known? Does everybody know about him? Yeah, okay, good. He was born here in 1872. He was at Leiden, professor, where I live in Leiden. And I don't know very much about his life, but he confronted Nazism in the 1930s, and to thank him for that, they detained him in 1942 and they banished him, I think, to Arnhem. And he died in 1945, just before the end of the war. And he was a historian, he was a philosopher, and one of his best-known books is Homo ludens from 1938, subtitled A Study of the Play Element in Culture. Homo ludens, playing man. And in this book, it's very short, he argues that play is not a behavior that is exhibited, for example, in a society or culture, but that play is fundamental to civilization itself, and that the structures and constructs of society, laws, politics, customs, and so on, they are literally, not metaphorically, literally based on elements of play. And, problematically for me, he says that play precedes culture. in all of the examples I was giving before, rest depends on work, humor depends on an expectation, and so on. They all depend on the thing that they are a holiday from. The other thing comes first. The holiday can't come before the work. It depends on the work. So in my analysis, which I've held for decades, play has to be dependent on serious things. And I said that this territory of play extends in all directions. So I want to spend just one more moment. One of the things I said was free play. So let's imagine a mechanism. A mechanism is a deterministic thing. I've got a piece of the mechanism moving up and down, and I've got a linkage. And you talk about free play. So as this thing moves down, there's a bit of free play there. As it moves down, well, it will move the other part of the mechanism. When it moves up again, there's a part where there is no effect on the other side. It has to wait until it covers the gap of the free play. And free play is not just complete looseness. It's actually, the free play is in very interesting because, for example, once we've made the contact and we're down here, possibly this machine is extremely precise and I can move the whole thing by tiny sub-millimeter increments and so on. But when we're in that situation of changing direction, we're going to encounter the free play where the expectation is violated. Now, I have always thought that any free play can only come into the context of a deterministic mechanism. Free play is a holiday from determinism. Obviously, because the holiday can't come before the work. So Huizinga shocked me when I read him because he takes a really radical step. And in his analysis, play becomes primary. It comes first. He says in the twin union of play and culture, play is primary. So for example, he construes law and its practice, like legal argument or what you do in a courtroom, as a form of play. Not that it looks a bit like play or it resembles play in some way or has some aspects of play in it, but that it is literally based on elements of play. That play is primary and the play came first. So in play, one of the things we do is we have a playground or a playing board, and it might be extended in time or space, or it might be imaginary, it might be an idea. But we mark a piece of the world out, and say, this is special, this is where the play takes place. It's a delineated space where special rules apply. It has a kind of protected holiness about it, like the court, like what happens in a church. And in this temporary world that play sets up, play proceeds according to rules. Play always proceeds according to rules. It's outside ordinary life, but of course it absorbs the players, whether they're actual children playing or players on a stage or people participating in something in a courtroom. It absorbs them absolutely, utterly. And Huizinga argues that this form is the same form that all kinds of activities take. The courtroom as a playground, religion, even work has the form of play. So I hadn't encountered him before I was doing my research for this talk. I thought this is amazing. I knew I wanted to do something about this question of play in Python here in Groningen, and then I found Huizinga writing about play. And just to make things more difficult for me, he's sort of turned some, or at least threatening some of my ideas that I've kind of been a basis for all kinds of other thinking for a very long time. So he gave me a lot of work, quite a long time after he died, I have to say. So even work has the form of play. Play is the general model for social order itself. And I find it challenging. It risks overturning the picture I have of those relationships between rules and expectations, in which activities like rest or play are the exception to the rule of an activity like work. So in one way I want to resist him, but I think he might offer in recompense a key to another related problem I have. On professional forums everywhere, people complain about lack of reward and recognition for work, that the relationship between work and reward is irrational, incomprehensible, and that what's valued is unclear. And my problem is, personal problem, Daniele's problem, that work is too obviously rewarding. At work, I receive immediate, constant, meaningful reward, even thanks and praise for value when I deliver it. I can see who I helped, and I can see how I helped. It can be measured, the value, and it often is. And I can see the connection between what I do and the recognition I receive. And the same system recognizes failure and shortcomings just as effectively. I'm not talking about fairness, because other people in the world create much more value than I do and put in more effort, and they're rewarded less. I'm only speaking about my experience in a certain system. So I do all of my work in a consistent, shared, explicit framework of performance and value, which has a very effective feedback loop that works on multiple levels and in different time scales, and includes an element of material reward. And of course, the work I do, it's interesting, it's meaningful, it has value that I recognize. And on top of this, I work with other people towards a common aim. I'm side by side with people who share values and goals. I work at Canonical on open source software. We make Ubuntu and other things. I'm part of that. I'm leading part of that. We are collaborating, and there's almost nothing so satisfying as the experience of collaboration. At any given moment of the working day, I can see multiple things that I could attend to, and I know that each one will bring me reward for the value I've delivered. Right now, I could attend to this matter or that matter or the other matter, and I will enjoy the interesting intellectual and technical challenges that it poses. I know there will be a direct connection between my doing that thing well and being recognized for it, and there's the pleasure of doing it amongst like-minded people, and I can do that at any... Oh, by the way, my colleagues are around the clock. 24 hours, from Australia to the west coast of the USA. So I can find anybody at work at any moment to do something, at any moment of the day, or indeed of the evening or the weekend. And my problem is, what is there in the rest of my life, my personal life, my domestic life, my life's other commitments and endeavors and projects and ends that can possibly compete with that? Because I have other things to do that are not at work, and they're things that they're important things, but that don't get rewarded or recognized. Not because they're not they're unimportant, but they don't exist in a framework of value and effort and recognition. And many of them are also, quite messy and well-defined. It's not clear exactly what they are. My domestic life is not neatly divided into parcels of work, tidying up and chores and repairs. There's no real end to any of it. I could do any particular thing more or less thoroughly. It's up to me, not a system, to decide how done is done. And to decide when it's done, because my domestic life does not run on the tidy rails of Canonical's working calendar. And when something is done, I don't get a chorus of approving nods from my colleagues who say, nice job. So self-recognition is okay, but it's nothing like being recognized by others, I can tell you that. And my work, my work, is all done in front of the screen and keyboard, right here. This thing is always at hand. So the effort of entry into a work task is practically nil. I'm there already. Open it up. I'm there. The work's available for me as if I were on tap. But to do something at home, in the garage or the garden, I've got to get into the right clothes. I've got to get the tools out of the cupboard. I've got to put everything away again. I've got to clean myself up, have a shower. Perhaps I can only do it when it's light outside or it's not raining, or perhaps it will be cold and unpleasant. So there's always some effort, much more effort to get into a task at home. Even things that aren't chores. Even plugging in my guitar, even playing is harder to get into. Because playing my guitar for half an hour means dragging something out of a cupboard and finding ways to make it fit with whatever's going on. And also, nobody has ever rewarded me or thanked me for playing the guitar. And I love photography and cameras, but the amount of physical pre-work I must do just to start working on a camera that I've been repairing is enormous. And that's not even counting the mental effort, or to develop a film that I expose. As for actually picking up a camera and getting into the frame of mind to get out of the house and go and take some photographs, the amount of effort is enormous compared with what's required just to open this up and do some rewarding work. It can be too much work, even to take holiday from work. It can be too much work to play. And I was in a talk earlier where somebody was talking about his programming life, his open source life, his fun project life in those terms as well, just earlier today. I know it's not just me who runs into these problems about what's rewarding and rewarded and what takes an effort to get into. Because meanwhile, the lure of the computer and my work is right here, and I can anytime be doing something that will be recognized and rewarded and rewarding. When I fail to do what's expected at work, I'm accountable. Soon enough, somebody will come saying, excuse me, Daniele, we noticed that you haven't done such and such. That framework of value and effort and recognition also does an excellent job of recognizing failure, too. And I'm not held accountable at home. What are they going to do, sack me? They might complain a bit about my absence or my inattention or my uncompleted commitment, but it takes them an effort to make a personal complaint. You know, they've got to cross a certain barrier. There's a difficult decision. The ones that come at work just come automatically from the system. There's nothing personal involved. And I work hard, so who wants to nag a hard-working person when he's finished work or on his day off? When he's, you know, now you've done your work and now you've got to do this other work. Who holds me to my commitments to relationships, to personal relationships, my network of friends, or my commitments to shared endeavors in the communities in which I live? Those are always easier, even the open source communities, by the way. Those are always easier to put off for another day. And I recognize that people talk about work-life balance, but I think it's really more complex than that, and I don't know how to work this out. I think it's really good for me that my work is done in a shared, explicit framework of performance and recognition and accountability. And also, I definitely don't want my personal life. I don't think my personal life should be like that. But how can I make those two things balance? The forces seem unbalanced. And this is where I think that Huizinga might have something to help me with. Was what could he say about this? Maybe he's got a key. Because he recognizes work as a game. Played out in a special marked-off playground with its own rules, the rules that make it so compelling to be there and remain there. And I think that's what's happening at work. You know, people talk about gamifying things as though that's going to make them more attractive. I think they should workify stuff, because that's what really makes it attractive. They don't like, you know, they don't like drug dealers going around schools, but they should stop those people hanging around schools, because that's where the real, I think there's a real kind of addiction and trap in that we haven't really dealt with. And maybe somebody here who knows more about Huizinga than I do can talk to me about that. And I'm really intrigued by this Groningen thinker. And it's one of those connections the universe seems to send your way, that I happened to find him while, as it were, on my way here. And I want to talk about my final problem, the darkness and the light. Whenever a friend comes to visit me in Leiden, their eyes go like this. They see bicycles and windmills and bridges and canals and children that big riding to school on bicycles, and they see mini beebs on every street, and they see orderliness and politeness and friendly. You know, most of my people come from Italy or the UK, so they live in madhouses, which helps. And they come and see this place and they say, oh my God, the people are so tall and they're so packed together. And it's as though they're discovering something that has been hidden from the rest of humanity. My God, is this how you live in the 21st century? And I think the Netherlands is a little bit more complicated than that, but that was also my encounter with it. So I was so stunned when I started reading Dutch literature. This is the Penguin Book of Dutch Short Stories. Oh, I put it in my bag here. I think it's one of the most horrendous books I've ever read. And I say that in a good way, because I think I've read it at least 3 times. There's all the darkness seems to have been expressed in the literature of this country, because I haven't read a single thing that has made me think, I need to take a break from reading before I come back to something else. And, you know, I also wondered, is there something, what is going on there? Is something repressed that has to be expressed in some way? Or is this another relationship between something that depends on something else? Anyway, when people come around and start talking that way, say, just read one of the stories and that will teach you a lesson. One of the most striking stories in the book is called The Minima Variations. It's narrated by an editorial secretary in a small publishing company that publishes poetry. These are modest businesses that somehow manage to stay afloat. They pay a small salary to a small staff of people who are in the industry because they love literature. They receive work from writers hoping to get their work into print, often from people they've never heard of because no one has heard of them before, because they've never been published. And it's not quite the same as the open source model, but some elements are the same. There's the maintainer of the project, the editor of the magazine, who has to decide what's included and what is not. The door has to be open for engagement. You don't know who's out there who might be ready to contribute or might have something. And if you're lucky, you might have received some magnificent, transformative submissions. But of course, you also sometimes have to say no sometimes, both to poetry and to pull requests. We regret to inform you that we do not consider your submission for publication in our magazine. Yours faithfully on behalf of the editorial board. And the story is about a certain Minima who doesn't take no for an answer. At first he's a kind of abstract, hopeful poet, and then becomes known and recognized and dreaded for the constant stream of material that he submits, even though we made it clear to him long ago that his work does not interest it in the slightest, but he engages, he follows and compliments and in comments on publications and interviews. He continues to ask for attention, and that's the job of the publishing company, to receive that attention, because their door has to be open to engagement. And some of that engagement will be unwelcome, except it's getting hard to deal with. We don't know what to do about Minima, and he's not really done anything wrong. He's just doing what anybody hoping to be published does. Maybe his next piece will find favor, but his presence, his identity becomes more concrete, expressed in letters and submissions and replies to rejections and his handwriting and the paper he uses, and he starts to acquire a presence through sheer persistence. So the publishers are on the inside. They're supposed to be the decision makers, the holders of power in this relationship, and he's merely the hopeful supplicant, but they in their office find themselves dancing to his tune. It had got to the point already where we pussyfooted around him. And one day he, unannounced, uninvited, he actually turns up. He's an energy, attention vampire. He won't leave. He can't be shaken off. The conversation is about Minima and Minima's interests, led by Minima. And the thing is, when somebody gives you something, even if you didn't ask for it, they place you under something of an obligation. You've still got material of mine. And he persists, and he turns his attention to one editor and plays that editor off against the other editor, and then comes back and keeps asking questions in search of the answers he wants, and his tone becomes more demanding, and it starts to weigh heavily on the author, on the editors. For the first time, I had the completely absurd idea that Minima might have a knife, even though there's no actual suggestion of threat. But he's seen pacing around the building, looking in through the windows. And it ends in the new year. The narrator's alone in the office. He's turned off the light so the person outside can't see in. He's about to leave, and someone is out there in the dark. He's outside, I'm inside. Neither of us moves. I shall stay inside for as long as he's outside. I have the feeling that we shall never leave. So the editorial secretary, who feels that he shall not leave, does not want to leave his place of work because he does not want to encounter or deal with the submitter of unwanted material. So how many of you are maintainers of open source software? How many of you have lived this? How many of you have lived this story already? The eager, friendly, persistent, hopeful, demanding submitter of pull requests, the attention vampire, to whom you feel obliged because they've submitted work, the dread of seeing another message come in. And the difference between you, the open source maintainer, and the editorial assistant is at least the editorial assistant is doing a paid job. And for the open source maintainer who does it because they want to rather than because they're paid to, we can say it's their pleasure. Their pleasure means labor, and their labor is unpaid. It's their passion. If they do it because they love it, it should occupy the same space that play should find in their life. But here they are, harassed, overworked, in a position where it's hard to say no, where no is not allowed to be the final answer. So I think that free open source software is one of the most amazing achievements of the last 40 years. And half of the value is in what's being offered freely, and the other half is being in this idea of being allowed to contribute and participate. But it's not really free. It doesn't cost money. Someone's paying for this with their time, and often with their health. And we've not created a sustainable model that successfully integrates these elements of employment and free time, of work and pleasure. So lately there's this tendency for open source projects to say, you're welcome to do whatever you like with our code, but we are not available to you. And if we want your input, we'll ask for it. They're shutting the doors because they have to. And there are real risks. We shouldn't underestimate the potential damage of bad poetry, but it's absolutely nothing compared to the current reality of the threats in the open source contribution model, where there are state-sponsored open source minimas trying to get vulnerabilities into global software infrastructure. Last year's XZ utils backdoor is believed to have been introduced by exactly one of these. Somebody who exploited the weaknesses in the model, which included the tiredness of the maintainers, peer pressure, the obligation to reciprocate and so on, and above all, exploited this unfixed, this problematic engagement between what's play and pleasure and what's work. A serious global security threat which was discovered by chance, was made possible because we have failed to establish a good model of work and play in open source software. That's what I think. Because we can't or don't or won't understand this complicated territory properly. We haven't taken control of it. And I think we need to. So I think I'm over time, I'm sorry, but I'm going to finish. There are my problems. The ludicity of Python, which I don't find so appealing, but the holiday from the rule, the idea that the exception must be the holiday from the rule, and then the fact that Huizinga comes along and drives a truck through it, thank you very much, and turns it upside down. But maybe he's got a key to my next problem, that I'd have to do work that is too powerfully rewarding for the other parts of my life to resist. And we've got the predicament of the open source maintainer. So maybe Huizinga holds the key, or maybe you can say something about that. But I think these are problems of work and play. Thank you so much. Sorry, I didn't put the time there.
No one expects
the talking box.
No one expects the talking box. It's a hint. If there's any questions, some remarks, anybody wants the talking box, ask. There's one. There you go.
I very much recognize this dance between maintainer and contributor. And well, do you have any practical life suggestions how to, well, get to a good resolution? Because both, like you said, both of them are spending their nights and their time to make the best.
I showed the slide that said, you know, do what you like with our software, but we're not open for contributions, thank you very much. So that's a shame, I think. But I don't think we can rely on goodwill and hoping. Work works. Work works because it's got such good rules around it, if you're lucky. I know that there are some unfortunate people who have to deal with work with really bad rules. I've got the opposite problem, but I know the rules of engagement. Even if I don't like them, I know exactly what they are. They're really explicit. And we have codes of conduct for open source projects, but when somebody comes along who is a dreadful nuisance, pestering people, who's not being violent or rude or aggressive, but is just taking up too much time, it takes the maintainers a great deal of emotional energy and actual time to deal with it. So I think probably that making all of that much clearer, more explicit from the start rather than afterwards, maybe building up a framework for it as those of us who are practitioners in open source, and start to set some expectations and act on them, because it's one thing that's really obvious is much harder to respond to a problem when it's been going on for a long time. And you say, okay, well, the first time you don't say no because you're being polite, and then that makes it harder to say no the second time. And by the time it's on the 7th time, you're in deep trouble. So not being ashamed to say no to somebody who's trying to help you, I think we've got to make it impersonal by making it part of rules.
Yeah, thanks.
So.
Just pass that along to throw in.
Well, I was wondering, have you ever received a banana where you expected a pull request?
I have had some very unexpected things. Somebody's wanted, say, we're talking about a software project and somebody wants to send me something, and it's not quite on the order of a banana versus a screwdriver, or a banana versus a pull request, but some very, I've been sent things, objects in the post, for example, and been surprised sometimes by the things that people are willing to show of themselves, No, I mean emotionally, perhaps rather.
Did it have the same positive effect? Did it have the same positive feeling to it, or?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't, because I said not all violations of expectations are funny. And they can also be unfunny, and they can be very unsettling. And when they're about social expectations, I think they can be very unsettling. So encountering somebody in a raw emotional state, which has happened, can be very, you think you're opening the door to one thing, and you get a very different experience, and that's definitely not funny. Yeah.
Any other questions from the remarks?
Okay.
Quiet.
Does it work? So I'm wondering, so a lot of the things you oppose to each other are related to work and play and the experience of specifically maintaining open source software. But one of the things I feel is a trend is that a lot of discussion around the problems surrounding maintenance of open source software boils down to funding. So if we just give these people more money, then most of the problems will be solved. That's sort of a feeling I get from the discussion around this. But that's not something you mentioned a lot. Do you feel that this boils down to a funding problem, or is it more fundamental?
I think it includes the funding problem. I did mention money because the editorial secretary does get money, and the open source maintainer does not. But you notice that it still doesn't protect the editorial secretary. It's not enough. So I think there should be much more money in open source software, and I think it would help. And also it would help because I think money pulls in rules after itself. If we're exchanging money, we're doing it according to some rules. That's not how money arrives in open source software. There are expectations as well. And they're impersonal expectations, there are contracts. And that's part of what my answer was to the other person, about setting up contracts. So I think it has to be part of it, but I don't think it will ever be only the answer. That's a really interesting question, yeah.
One final question. Here we go, in the front. There you go.
Hey. Well, I hope this is not a silly question. But, you mentioned that there are no contributions right now. No? Sorry. Yeah, but this all started for most people, like contributing to open source software. And if we we take this from away, like we're not open to contributions. Sorry. How do you keep the people and the community engaged, and how do you keep this playful environment for keep people inspired to contribute in some other ways or whatever?
I completely sympathize with your question. I think it would be I was having conversations a couple of weeks ago with people who are taking that step, and I think it's a real shame because I got my break, 16 years ago. I had my first Python lessons. I didn't know anything about software programming. But I found all these people, mostly existing on Django and Python IRC channels, who wanted to pull me up after them. And that's how I became a contributor to Django. That was my way in. And I know it's been the way in for a lot of the people that I know. It's a really important part of their lives and their professional lives. And seeing the barriers come down there, where there's one class of people who are on the inside saying, okay, you can use our software, but we're going to take complete control over the means of production of it, we will really lose something. And I don't want that to be the answer. But I believe it's honestly a complex problem, and I don't know what the solutions are.
On that open ending, please, for a brilliant talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.